Started.
Okay, and can you all see the slides that I have up?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
Fantastic. That's great to hear. Thank you. Right, so hello everyone. My name is Megan Heap and I head up our strategy development and delivery for intellectual property enforcement at the IPO. It's a bit of a mouthful there. Firstly, I just want to say thank you very much to CTSI for inviting me to talk to you today. And it's great to be able to be here. Sounds like the symposium's been great so far. I really hope you've enjoyed the sessions that you've joined. The programme looks excellent. Before we start, it's just a little bit of the housekeeping for virtual meetings. If I could ask you all to mute your microphones when you're not speaking. If you do have any questions, please do use the hand button. I'm very happy to take any questions during the talk, or if you want to wait to the end, I've left some time for questions, so whichever works best for you. The challenge is remembering to unmute yourself when you want to speak, which I seem to struggle with quite regularly. So that's the kind of housekeeping out of the way. So why am I here? Well, my team is currently working on the new government strategy for intellectual property enforcement. And we really want to make sure that our work takes on board the views of one of our most important partners, and that is Trading Standards. So it's also a great opportunity for me to talk to you about intellectual property more generally, talk about why it's important and more broadly what we're trying to achieve in this space. Intellectual property rights, or IP rights, as you probably have also heard them called, are really important because they protect intangible assets. But why are intangible assets important? Well, in 2016, the Office for National Statistics found that investment in intangible assets was £134.3 billion. Huge amounts here. Whereas investment in tangible assets, those physical goods, was £148.5 billion. So actually not too far, off in similarity there. The data also showed that investment in intangible assets is growing more rapidly than that of tangible. So lots of words get tripped over here, I think. It's actually not that surprising that the investment is growing more rapidly when you think about the fact that tangible assets, or these physical assets, tend to depreciate in value over time, whereas the intangible ones, where we have the intellectual property, actually have the ability to appreciate in value. So really, when you're considering that this means that nearly half of a company's value lies in their intangible assets, and investments are rising rapidly, the need for protection of these assets becomes very clear. And this is why the enforcement of intellectual property is such an important part of the IPO's work. However, while the IPO plays an important part in ensuring the framework for tackling IP infringement is up to date and accessible, Trading Standards plays that critical role in actually enforcing those IP rights. And this is why it's really vital that we understand where you think the strategy should be focusing over the next 5 years. So just move on to the next slide. So what is the Intellectual Property Office, also known as the IPO? Well, it's the official UK government body which is responsible for intellectual property rights. It operates and maintains the IP system in the UK. It tries to encourage innovation and to really help the economy and society benefit from the knowledge and ideas that it has. You may also know of it as the Patent Office. This is what it was called back when it was set up in 1852, and this was solely to grant patents back then. It's increased rapidly since then, and it now covers the granting of not only UK patents, but also of trademarks and designs. And in addition to the right granting function, it's also responsible for government policy on IP, and this includes copyrights as well as the registered rights I've just mentioned. It also has a specific responsibility on educating businesses and consumers on IP rights and responsibilities. And then lastly, the bit I mentioned before is its responsibility supporting enforcement of intellectual property. However, obviously the fact that it's not actually an enforcement agency means that it's our work with enforcement agencies such as Trading Standards and the police is really important. And instead, we actually try and provide that effective enforcement framework to enable the enforcement agencies to carry out their roles. So just move back to the next one then. So we have an enforcement team, quite a large one. It carries out quite a wide range of functions as well. Not only are there 3 policy teams which cover issues such as our international work, our capacity building and our outreach, but we also have an IP crime intelligence hub, the hub in particular includes quite a range of roles, including researchers, analysts and intelligence officers. And actually, thanks to the last IP enforcement strategy, it also includes financial investigators as well. And all of these teams work extremely closely with other government departments and enforcement agencies such as trading standards. The team I didn't mention actually was my team working on the strategy in particular. So, why are we enforcing? Why is it so important? Well, simply put, an IP right, whether it be a patent, a trademark, a design, or something that is protected by copyright, is worth nothing if it can't be enforced. And it is these IP rights that enable businesses and individuals to benefit from their investment. And this is particularly important when we're thinking about SMEs and those who are already struggling in the current climate. Actually getting those rewards back from their investment are critical sometimes. So in addition, if these investments were not protected and the IP rights were not enforced, there's a lot less incentive for businesses to focus on that research and development. And that in itself would have a significant impact on innovation generally across the UK. But we also need to remember that the framework needs to be balanced. And this is something that actually the UK is really renowned for. So while these incentives are key in rewarding creators and encouraging innovation, we also need to enable a competitive market and have a system that works in the public interest. New innovation really does rely on the existing information out there, and without public access, we wouldn't have the same level of discovery and creation. And just think of all the amazing things that we would not have these days. It's quite crazy. But what is the cost? What's the actual cost of infringement of these rights? As you can see on the slides, there's a cost both in terms of the economy, but also harm to the community. So on the economic harm, this has risen significantly. So in 2013, it was £4.2 billion of foregone sales due to counterfeit and pirated products. And this has actually gone up to 9.2 billion in 2016. And it's a staggering amount. Just to probably point out, by the way, in case you're wondering why I'm referencing 2013 and 2016 figures, the data is always a few years old due to the time it takes for them to be released and shared and then normalized. So sorry, it's unfortunately we can't give you any more current figures than that, but that increase has been a trend for a long time now. So back to the harm. The harm to the community is just as important. And this is something I'm sure you're very aware of. We have harm to consumers who purchase fake and often unsafe goods, whether that's knowingly or unknowingly. They can fall victim to computer malware or identity theft. And there's a huge impact on communities from losing these legitimate businesses. Not to mention the fact that the profits often go to criminal organisations, not the kind of people we really want to be funding. So, the previous IP enforcement strategy. So to help focus the government response to the issues that I've just mentioned, the IPO has an IP enforcement strategy. The last strategy was published in 2016, and it took us to May of this year. So in line with those 3 aims you can see on the slide, the strategy also looked at 6 specific areas. It looked at reducing the level of illegal content online, also tackling the trade in counterfeit goods. So this is your kind of piracy and counterfeit side. It looked at how to further strengthen the legal framework to enable and facilitate easier access to justice. Again, very important for SMEs in particular. It also looked at increasing education awareness and building respect for IP. So this is lots of behaviour, not an easy piece of work, but something that I think is going to take a long time, but is very important. It also looked at how to make it safer for UK rights holders and businesses to trade internationally, something that obviously is going to be increasingly important as well over the next few years. And then lastly, it looked at improving the evidence base. And this is really important to have that evidence, because this is how policy is made. It has to be evidence-based if we want it to be effective and want it to be right. So over the last 4 years, we've had some excellent progress in the areas identified in the last strategy. So a few examples of some things that we've done. We've delivered voluntary agreements with search engines to demote copyright infringing websites. This is really important in helping to ensure that it's the legitimate sites that are seen by consumers. We've also developed the capability of our Intel Hub and the IPO, as I mentioned before, so they can actually carry out financial investigations now, which has been extremely successful. We're continuing building on the success of PIPCU, which is the Police IP Crime Unit, which was established back in 2013. We've also delivered some IP-specific training to trading standards, so hopefully some of you have benefited from this, but also to police and industry brand protection staff across the country. So it's really trying to kind of get that messaging out there and ensure that the people we're working with have the right skills and the right knowledge to be able to carry out their roles. And lastly, we also we pioneered the world's first research into consumer attitudes to buying counterfeit goods. We've done a lot previously on piracy, but the counterfeits was a whole new area. So this complements our existing research into the copyright infringing activity, and it's an amazing step forward in understanding consumer behaviour across both piracy and counterfeits. So, what do we want to achieve with this strategy? Where do we go from here? Well, we're planning to publish a new strategy early next year. I say early, everything's very dependent on various things like the pandemic, for example, but hopefully, early as possible. This will take us through the next 5 years. It's a really different landscape ahead of us, not going to lie about that, both in terms of our international relationships, but also the rapidly evolving online environment. And with the UK taking its independent place outside of the EU and the new trade deals we're forging with countries around the world, we recognise this is currently has quite a lot of uncertainty around, which can itself be quite nerve-wracking, but we're trying to look at the positives. There are actually some great opportunities as well, and we want to use them. We want to really be ambitious in our strategy. Some of the big things that really matter to us is we really want to ensure that the UK is seen as the best place in the world for businesses to start and grow. We need to ensure that we're supporting UK and international businesses and innovators, really ensuring that their IP is protected and respected and that they have that access to justice if needed. We currently, I'm really pleased to say, we do currently have a world-leading IP enforcement regime. We tend to be at the top of all of the different trackers globally. And first and foremost, we really want to maintain this. We want to continue to be recognised internationally as a leader and an innovator in this area. Part of this, part of this is actually about maintaining this effective and balanced framework that we currently have. But the other part of it is really about thinking outside of the box, pushing all the different boundaries, trying to understand what is actually truly insurmountable and what is just really challenging, but still actually possible. And the technological advances are staggering these days. And they can be an amazing tool in the fight against infringement, but they can also be used by those who are infringing, allowing for a much quicker and wider proliferation of illicit goods, both domestically and across borders. So this is a real challenging part. We need to ensure that our enforcement framework is moving with the times. It needs to be working in the digital age that we are in. Technology is evolving so quickly. This is really challenging, and we need to be able to adapt and tackle the changes in real time. And it's that real time that's, I think, a really important part. And it's definitely not easy when you're looking at legislative frameworks, which are anything but swift sometimes to do. So this is why we want to look at how we can be flexible and forward-looking as much as possible in the strategy and in our approach generally. We also need to ensure that those who are responsible for enforcing IP rights, such as trading standards, have the right framework, the right tools and the right skills to do so. And most importantly, that you have the right support from the IPO. We believe that for this to be truly world leading in this space, it is critical that we work collaboratively with all parties, and this is both publicly and privately. We need to be acting at every level and using all the possible tools available to us. And as I mentioned before, this is basically why I'm here today, and want to try and help raise the profile of IP and enforcement. and really just ensure that you're aware of the work that we're doing on the strategy, and that you have the opportunity to actually feed into it as well. So, looking at where we are so far with the strategy, we have 3 core strategic aims, which have been drafted to help provide a clear vision of where we want to be in 5 years and how we can best get there together. As you can see, the aims focus on 3 main areas, and that's leadership, partnership, and education. On leadership, this is very much about how we remain that world leader, like I've just talked about. It's about striving for that gold standard domestically and internationally, and really making the UK the best place in the world for businesses to start and grow. On partnership, this is this collaboration element with our partners, and again, both domestically and internationally. And when I'm talking about partners, I'm always talking about both public and private. We recognise that some things couldn't and shouldn't be done by government, and actually industry are in a much better place to actually deal with them. And we need to be able to support them to do that. On education, this is very much about empowering consumers. For some, it's empowering them to help them to identify illicit goods. So something that I think the current changes in the online environment have made actually much harder in some areas. For other consumers, it's just about helping them to understand actually the benefits of buying genuine goods and supporting legitimate businesses, and the wider harms of buying the illicit ones. So some of the things I mentioned earlier. In this space, it's not a small aim, but it's a good one, I think. We're working towards a time where infringement is seen as socially unacceptable to all. So we're going to be looking at any of the emerging issues in the strategy against these core strategic aims, and we will use them to identify then potential actions. So for these aims though to be really effective in steering our work, they do need to be right. And this is why we wanted to share them with you and to hear your views on them. So we recently, what we've done so far, we've recently held a series of workshops, and they involved industry, academics, government departments, and enforcement agencies. Both CTSI and NTS attended these, which was excellent. And they were incredibly helpful in understanding some of the emerging issues in more detail. And they really provided that opportunity as well for additional areas to be raised that we hadn't already come across in our research. Probably won't surprise you actually, but one of the hot topics was intelligence sharing. There are a lot of people involved in this space, and generally all working very hard to ensure that IP rights are respected and protected. However, the intelligence is often not being shared, or not being shared in a way that enables us to work collaboratively and effectively. So we really need to ensure that we have the right mechanisms and the right framework in place to enable that intel to flow across all relevant parties, really giving everyone such as trading standards the information to tackle infringement and coordinate effectively with others. Another area that was of great interest was the consumer behaviour that I mentioned before. Again, both in terms of those who are knowingly and unknowingly infringing. Getting information to those who need it on how to identify illicit goods is not an easy thing, and neither is changing mindsets, frankly. So we really need to be looking at who we're trying to reach, what our message is, what's the best forum for sharing it, and also really who should be sharing that message, because sometimes, again, government isn't the right body to do that. This really isn't a small piece of work, but it's something that the IPO is very committed to. It's not just in our enforcement strategy, it's actually in our department strategy, our agency strategy. So it's something that we are very committed to, and we're going to be reaching out to partners on how we can work together on a targeted campaign. In line with this, actually, there was a significant discussion around how consumers and businesses report IP infringement. I'm sure you're aware that at the moment there are multiple ways in which IP infringement can be reported. This makes it very complicated for those who are looking to report, and also creates some real challenges around how reported cases are then recorded and how industry and enforcement agencies are notified as well. So simplifying this would be a great step, I think, in not only helping to empower consumers who find they have unknowingly purchased fake goods, but it would also really help the enforcement agencies to coordinate any actions they may take. And I'm also sure this will not be a surprise for you to hear that resources for enforcement agencies such as trading standards was raised at the workshops. And I can be very clear in saying that both government departments and industry recognise the importance of the work the enforcement agencies are doing in this space and the impact the significant reduction in funding and resources has had on their ability to carry out this work. I'm not going to lie, there are real challenges in providing funding directly, but we are looking at all the options and ways in which we can best support our enforcement colleagues to carry out this critical work. So the slide obviously by no means covers all the issues that have been raised by stakeholders, but hopefully it does gives you a bit of a flavour of some of the emerging issues that we're looking at in more detail. If you do think there are other issues that we've missed that we need to be considering, we would absolutely love to hear from you, because we need to make sure that it's really fit for purpose. So, what's next? Firstly, I want to echo one of the things I've probably harped on quite a lot about already. We do want to hear from you. No, this isn't just lip service. Whether it's through CTSI or directly to me and my team at the IPO, we want to ensure that we understand how you see this area evolving over the next 5 years. We want to know what you think needs to be maintained. So what is actually working really well at the moment? But then really, what are the biggest challenges for trading standard officers who are there on the ground actually enforcing these rights? And then what would be the best outcome that you would like to see? We're going to be using all of that information then and all the evidence that we have so far to identify the emerging issues and the potential actions. And we're going to look at these against the entire supply chain. We'll be working with our partners, again, both public and private, on how these can be most effectively taken forward. And it might be that that's by government, by enforcement agencies, by industry, or it could be done collectively. And we're open to whatever the best routes, really. We're also going to look at how we can monitor and assess the actions stemming from the strategy, ensuring that we're meeting our objectives and commitments and also able to adapt in line with any technological advances or unforeseen challenges such as a global pandemic. So yeah, this evaluation is I think just as important as everything else. You know, we need to actually understand what's worked, what hasn't before we come on along to the next one in 2026. That's quite scary. So thank you, basically. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you all today. I hope it's been useful in understanding the value of protecting IP rights and giving you an insight into the work the IPO is doing on our government strategy for IP enforcement. And as I said, please do get in touch with either through CTSI or me and my team if you want to discuss any of this in more detail. My email address is there, along with that of my team inbox as well. But also there's time for questions today if you would like to. I'll just stop the sharing my screen as well. Okay. Are there any questions? Glenys. It's the whole got to unmute and all the rest, which is always fun.
Oh, sorry, I just managed to make myself on mute there. I was trying to hide my screen. No, it was a very good talk and I really enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone did. And what I was very interested in was the services within the service that you offer. So things like your financial investigators, I wasn't aware of that. Is that something that we can tap into if we needed that sort of service? You know, regarding any IP infringements that we come along, you know, so if we're trying to chase the money, as it were, you know, regarding a case that we have.
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and yes, I mean the hub is there to support the work that's being done across across the UK by yourselves and others. So definitely we'd love to hear from you if there's particular cases that you think we could support you on, whether that's through financial investigations, whether that's through some of our analysts or anything. As with everything, it comes down to resources. And in a way, I'd probably partially love everyone to flood us with loads of amazing kind of insights and intel and requests for investigations. We probably couldn't manage all of them, but we would definitely try and help where we can.
Well, I mean, that I guess as well, maybe a lot of people have interacted in that way with you before, but I think it would be good to know what extent these services can go. So if you have an actual case, I don't know, maybe that's something you've rolled out before and I've maybe missed in training previously, but I sometimes we don't know what we're looking at, I think.
Yes.
You know, so we've got like things like mobile phone data or, you know, records that we think might link on to something else. We might not have those skills or awareness to know, you know, what that might lead to. And I think an insight into that, you know, a sort of tips and hints, if you like, to say, actually, that could lead on to another bit of intelligence.
Yeah.
That would be very, very useful, I think, you know,
That's a really good
and your expert eyes there, you know, regarding, because forensic financial investigators is a huge skill in itself.
Yeah, it is. It is.
You know, and I know they get heavily used with benefits investigations, if you know what I mean, like fraud for welfare benefits and things like that. Again, chasing the money. But it's maybe something that I or other colleagues have maybe not looked at recently or been able to spot or think about.
I'm just taking a note of that because I'm going to make sure that it's in, what I'd like to do, I'm going to make sure that it's in the training that the one that I mentioned before that we've been rolling out to yourselves and various other kind of bodies as well. I'll see how much that side of it is covered in the current training and add to it a bit more as well if it needs it, obviously. And the other thing that it's probably worth mentioning to you as part of this strategy, you know, I talked about the resourcing side and the fact that it's actually very difficult to fund directly, but there are other ways that we can support. And I really want to try and ensure that you out there in the different regions are actually getting the kind of guidance and someone you can kind of contact easily, and you know where to go, you know how to kind of, you know, who to approach for those little questions around, is this kind of worth investigating more, is it not, you know, what do we do about this? And that's something that I'm looking into, how that could be covered a bit more effectively than it currently is.
Again, I think that would be really useful to get an insight, because you can get you know, distracted. You can't see the wood for the trees sometimes.
Yeah,
and you go along a route and you think, well, that was a complete waste of time and it's not added anything to my case. And sometimes just a sort of a feel or a look at that would be very good. So thank you for that, Megan. That's fantastic.
Thanks. Thank you very much, Glenys. Are there any other questions from anyone else? Stunned you all into silence. That's absolutely fine. You all have my contact details, so please do get in touch if something, you know, you think of something later, or if you want to talk about any of this any further.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much, Megan. That was brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Really appreciate that. Thank you very much, everyone.